we beseech thee upon thy servants who bear office in this country, the spirit of charity and justice, that they may in all things walk before thee with a steadfast purpose and a single heart, and serve faithfully through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Most gracious God, author of all good things, we beseech thee for the Parliament of Barbados, especially the Senate at this time assembled, that thou would be pleased to direct and prosper all their counsels to the advancement of the country, the glory of thy church, the welfare and safety of our people, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. And now let us say together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And may the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be upon us now and forevermore. Amen.
The Senate is now in session.
Messages from Her Excellency, the Governor General. Announcements by Your Honor, the President.
To advise honorable senators that have heard from Senator Rudy Grant, who will be traveling on business and unfortunately will not be able to join us today. Equally, Senator Lynette Holder will not be able to join us, and she has sent her excuse. Or with Senator Lisa Cummings, Senator Moore is stayed up in a meeting all day, education-related meeting, and will not be able to join us either. And Senator Chris Maynard, I've heard from him to the effect that he's running late, but look forward to joining us later. I hope I haven't left out anyone. I don't think I've left out anyone. To announce further that the minutes of the meeting held on Wednesday, May the 15th this year are not yet ready, and to that extent, we'll welcome a resolution motion deferring the minutes.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the minutes for May 15th, 2019 be deferred.
The question is that the minutes for the meeting held on Wednesday, May 15 this year be deferred. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. There's also a message from the Honourable House of Assembly to the Honourable the Senate, which I'll read in a minute. message reads as follows. The Honourable, the House of Assembly has the honour to inform the Honourable, the Senate, that at its sitting on Tuesday, the 28th of May, 2019, the Honourable, the House of Assembly disagreed with the Honourable, the Senate, in the amendments to the Public Service Retrenched Workers Bill 2019, made by the Honourable, the Senate on the 15th of May, 2019, for the subjoined reason, and amended the bill by deleting clauses 2 and 3 and reinserting clauses 2 and 3 as follows. 2.1. The Accountant General is hereby authorized and required to make payment of gratuity and pension out of the Consolidated Fund in respect of the public service of 84 public officers who were employed in the Ministry of Transport, Works and Maintenance and who were retrenched on the 19th of October 2018. The reduced pensions due to the persons referred to in subsection 1 shall be payable upon their attaining the age of 60 years in accordance with the provisions of the Pensions Act, Chapter 25. The Minister may by order specify the public officers referred to in Section 2.1 and the gratuity to be paid in respect of each public officer so specified. The amendments made by the bill, by the Honourable the Senate on the 20th of May 2019 do not reflect the decision made by the Cabinet on the subject matter. And the Honourable House of Assembly transmits the amended bill to the Honourable the Senate, inviting concurrence in the amendments to the bill. That is dated the 20th day of May 2019 and is signed by the Deputy Speaker.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers, reports from select committees, questions to ministers, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate moved by minister, introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of the Utilities Amendment Bill 2019, the Barbados Water Authority Validation of Water and Sewerage Charge Bill 2019, the resolution to vest in Barbados Tourism Investment Incorporated parcels of land, property of the Crown, at Bay Street in the parish of St. Michael for the purpose of tourism development. Mr. President, I beg to move that these be now read the first time.
The question is that the bills of which notice was just given be now read a first time. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those
Aye.
against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Public business. Order number 6, sir. In the name of the Honourable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Data Protection Bill 2019.
Do we hear him, Bill?
Mr. President, I rise with a smile this morning because this smile reflects the immense excitement with which I introduced this data protection bill to this honorable House. It is a transformational piece of legislation whose time has come. And its time has come because the world has changed. We are moving into a digitally empowered future. This Data Protection Bill 2019 seeks to protect the personal data of people of this country and of people who share information with this country as Barbados advances towards its digitally empowered future. And when I say personal data, Mr. President, I mean the various bits of details and information that government and business and organizations collect from you and about you as you go about doing business in a digital world. In my capacity outside of this chamber, Mr. President, as Minister of Innovation, Science, and Smart Technology, my ministry has as part of its mandate the responsibility to provide reliable, affordable digital services of government, and to contribute to an enabling environment for a modern Barbados with a digitally intelligent society that is connected locally and globally and able to compete in a digital economy. This Data Protection Act, this Data Protection Bill, is part of creating that enabling environment. It addresses how personal data, that's data that's collected from you and me and the general public, how it will be collected, how it will be kept, how it will be processed, how it will be used in terms of purpose, and how it will be shared. Mr. President, I need not tell you, the members of this House, or even the people of Barbados, that the world has entered an age where most of what we do, the way we transact business, is electronic. It is powered by digital and it is driven by data. Data we have on people and things. And when I say digitally powered, what I mean, sir, is that we use computers now instead of cabinets to store information. We use mobile communication devices that we can walk around with rather than send someone out with a message on foot when we want to connect with each other. We use internet technology to access information and to build relationships. Paper-based records are now becoming more electronic records. Manual processes are becoming more automated. Services for which we stood in line are now services we're able to access online or by mobile apps. The reality, Mr. President, is that manual and analog systems are falling away from popular use, much like the horse and buggy fell away from popular use as a means of transportation. And the truth is, the world is not turning back. Data is now the lifeblood of the digital era. It is the currency. Andrew Keene said that being human in a digital world is about building a digital world for humans. And this act certainly helps to contribute to that kind of environment for Barbados. And if we are to advance as a society and an economy that is digitally powered and empowered, we must embrace the culture of a commitment to data protection for our citizens. People want to do business with people that they can trust with their information. And people are right in Barbados. I have heard the questions, and my mother included, have asked, so what are you going to do with my data once you have it? Who will get access to it? How private will it be? How will it be distributed or shared? What recourse will I have if things don't quite go right? Mr. President, this data protection bill addresses all of these. So let's talk about what this bill actually includes. This bill speaks about personal data, and it speaks about sensitive personal data. So all data is not created equal in the eyes of this bill. And if we go to part 2, page 14 of the bill under interpretations, personal data is data that allows you to identify people, either from the data itself or when you put that data in connection with others. It's things like your name, your first name and your last name, and your address. Those would be some parts of personal data. Sensitive data, if we go to part 2, page 16, under interpretation, you will notice that there is a specific definition, and some people in this room would be surprised to know that sensitive personal data it also includes whether you're a member of a trade union or whether you're a member of a political party. All of those, including health, your race, your sexual orientation, all of those are part of what is called sensitive personal data. And this bill treats to personal data and sensitive personal data similarly in many ways, but it applies a greater rigor to sensitive personal data. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Because if you look to clause 9 on page 24, it speaks of the specific circumstances where your sensitive personal data can be processed. In other words, people cannot just take your sensitive personal data and use it. There are specific circumstances when it can be applied, and they are spelled out. Again, you ask clause 9 on page 24. And some of that sensitive personal data includes genetic data, as I mentioned. So sometimes you may have things like saliva, your blood, your skin cells, your hair. That too is part of data that could be collected. Sometimes when people are doing DNA testing, that is considered sensitive personal data. Your health records, things related to your physical and your mental condition, they all fall into that area of sensitive personal data. And so, as I said, they are treated similarly, both your personal and sensitive, but there's greater rigor applied to sensitive data. Now, this bill really has, Mr. President, principles that underpin the provisions. And I have sought to simplify those principles. This bill limits the purpose for which your data can be used. And let me explain that. If people collect data about you for one purpose, they have to stick to that purpose. They are not allowed to use it for other purposes than you have given them permission to use it for. So, for example, you go to one of the supermarkets and they're having a raffle for a car at Crop Over. And you provide your data for that raffle to see if you might win. They cannot then take that data and use it to send you information about getting a loyalty card. And that is what this bill will seek to do. It will seek to make sure that the purpose for which you have given consent for your data to be used, that they stick to that purpose. Another one of the principles is that your data, if they process it, when I say process it, it is when they use it, they manipulate it, and they use it to deliver whatever service or product you intend. that data, according to one of the principles, must be processed lawfully, fairly, and transparently. So they don't get to choose what that means, because clauses 5 and 6 spell out what lawfully and fair means. Fair means that they cannot deceive you or mislead you or trick you into giving your data, because that would not be fairly acquired data. And who gives your data must be authorized so to do. So someone can't just walk around wantonly and decide that they're going to give your data to whomsoever shall. That is part of the definition of fair. And lawful means that you must give consent for a specific purpose. And processing must be necessary. So it's not just a specific purpose, but it is a necessary. Another principle is that people can only take data from you that is relevant. So if I determine that I wanted to go and provide information so that you could deliver coffee to me every single morning that we are in Senate, you might want to ask me, where is the Senate location? Where will I be at that time, so you know where to deliver? You may ask me my name so you know to whom, but you cannot ask me what my political affiliation is. It is not relevant to the specific thing that you have to do using my data. People are also not allowed to keep your data for as long as they feel like. One of the principles in this bill says that they must keep your data for the necessary amount of time to fulfill the purpose for which it was obtained. So let's go back to that raffle at the supermarket. If they collected it for that purpose, when the raffle is over, they must get rid of it. If that is the only purpose for which you had given consent for your data to be used. Now, people who are allowed to keep your data for whatever amount of time is deemed necessary, they have to keep that data up to date and accurate. It is one of the provisions within this bill. So keeping outdated information that really doesn't tell a single truth is something that we are requiring in this bill, that persons or entities that collect your data must keep it up to date and accurate. Your data can only be kept for a certain period, identifying you uniquely. So for example, if I put your first name and your last name and your address together and your date of birth, that might uniquely identify you. But if I disaggregated that data and I said, well, the only part of this we will be processing is persons by the name of Monique, and it does not attach anything else that identifies you uniquely, you can keep that information, but you cannot keep it in a way that identifies people uniquely. So for statistical purposes, there is a way in which that information has to be kept. Now, for a child under the age of 18 years old, consent must be given by the parent or the guardian for the child's data to be shared. And we're going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later. Now, your data, this bill governs the fact that your data can be shared with people in Barbados, yes, But if at any point in time your data is going to be sent any place outside of Barbados, there must be proper safeguards in place. And this bill specifies what some of those safeguards are. Clause 24 on page 41. They must demonstrate how they will be protecting your data as they transmit it. And they must tell you that your data is being shared and with whom. Anyone who is in control of your data or processing your data, they must be properly registered with the authorities being set up here in Barbados. So it cannot be just anyone. If you are a company or an entity that is collecting data on people, there are, and I'll go through that later as we look at the actors that are part of this ecosystem here to protect your data. They have to be registered. The data controller has to be registered, the data processor has to be registered, and you have to register your privacy officers. I will explain what each of those is later on. That way, there is always a record of those who are authorized to handle data in different environments. And so those are the principles and the associated provisions with them. But then you have rights. The rights that you have start with the fact that the person or the entity connecting your data, they do not own your data. You as the individual own your own data. And as the owner of that data, certain rights come with it. I call one the right to say yes, meaning you have the right to give consent for them to use your data. But that consent must be specific, it must be explicit, and it must be legitimate. The bill specifies all three. So I'll give you an example. Over this last week, one government agency has been doing training with persons who were separated from government during the retrenchment process. That would have been our Ministry of Innovation, Science, and Smart Technology. And there was a private entity collaborating with government for that training, who were issuing the certificates for the training. So once you've completed the training, you get a certificate of having completed that particular training. Government was the entity that was collecting the information of the name of the person and their address and their telephone number, their contact information, so you could contact them for the purpose of the training, etc. In order for that private entity to issue the certificate, that meant government had to share your name so they can put Senator Monique Tate on the training, on the certificate. When you talk about explicit and purpose, we then ask those persons who were being trained, they had to indicate that the government was permitted to give their information for the purpose of completing the certificate for the training. And then when the entity said, now if we have now trained these people, if in the future we might consider hiring them, do we have permission to keep their names as part of our pool of possible persons we could engage on a project, whether here in Barbados or elsewhere? So there had to be a second permission that they gave to use their information for the purpose that this company now could hold that information for the purpose of contacting them later about potential opportunities. So you couldn't just say, can we share your information with this company? We had to give very specific, explicit, and legitimate. All three. And you don't get to lump things together and said, well, we will just be using this information for our business and services. Every single purpose has to be spelled out, and you must give permission for each individually. You don't get to opt out after they have brought you in. You have to opt in the first place. So they can't say, well, you're in, so now if you want to leave, you can go ahead. No, they have to give you permission up front to bring you in the first place. So it is it's not the opt-out approach, it's you have to opt in. You also have the right to get your information in a machine-readable format. And I'm going to connect that later to one of the other rights that you have, because you have the right to know. You have the right to know who has your information, what information they have on you. And you can query and you can ask to see what information they have on the data. And if indeed you need that data on what they have on you in a machine-readable format, they can't give it to you any old how. They can give it to you in paper, they can give it to you in whatever way you consent to have it in, and as long as the way in which you want it does not create a hardship on that entity to be able to provide it to you in that way, there's an expectation that you'll be able to. Now that you have that right to say yes, you also have the right to say no. You can say no to persons and entities processing your information. You can say, no, I'm sorry, I will not provide that information. Now there are exemptions, and we're going to get to exemptions later, because of course, you know, if there's a criminal matter, you can't say, but I am not providing my information to you. And so there are other exemptions like that, and there's a part of this presentation called exemptions, which we will go through as well. But in the normal course of things, as long as it does not fit those exemptions, you have the right to say no. You cannot process I do not give consent. You also have the right to be part of something some of you mentioned to me today, direct marketing. So if people send out these direct marketing camps, you have the right to say no to those. We'll talk about later. You also have the right to change your mind. So if you gave consent the first time and you decide, I am changing my mind, I no longer want to give you consent, you have the right to do that too, and it is provided for in this bill. You may even say for direct marketing, I give you permission to use this for 21 days, and after the 21 days, they have to let go of it. And because you have the right to know, you can go query them and find out, did you release my information after these 21 days? And in fact, when we get to penalties a little bit later, I'll tell you, if they start to lie to you, the kinds of fines or jail terms that go with it. As I mentioned, you have the right to know. But let me tell you some other things you have the right to know. You have the right to know who has your data, who is the data privacy officer, who is looking out for your rights, the purpose for which your data will be processed, and the categories of personal data so that will be used. So for example, I might only need your first name, last name, and your date of birth. And those are the categories of information that I may very well need. And I might not need all the others. You also have the right to know the intended recipients of your data if it has to be sent somewhere else. You have the right to know when, to whom, and under what safeguards, security safeguards, your data will be transferred to others. And I know that you will like this final right. You have the right to complain. Senator Franklin, you have the right to complain. And you have the right to appeal. And there is a data commissioner that is part of the infrastructure that will be set up to administer this act. There will be a tribunal that will also I see that Senator Tate is asking to be on this tribunal. And there is also an appeal to the court. So if for whatever reason you believe that your rights have been violated, or you choose to challenge compliance in any number of areas, you can appeal to the data commissioner. And if you are not satisfied, there is a higher appeal above the data commissioner, which is the tribunal. And if you're still not pleased with what the tribunal, you can go to the courts. Every day, pardon me? Hi. Actors, every day there are people whose job will be exclusively to watch over your data, to see that your rights and your privacy are protected. They look to see what data is collected, how it is processed, how it is stored, who can have access to it, how it is used, with whom it is shared, and the conditions under which it is shared. That is their job. One such actor is the Data Protection Commissioner. If you look to Part 7, Clause 70 on page 76, you'll get the details of what that Data Protection Commissioner is. And that is the principal administrator who has responsibility for the general administration, the enforcement of rights, the development of standards. That Data Protection Commissioner has investigative responsibilities, and they're responsible for compliance with the Act, as well as public awareness. The Data Commissioner is also empowered to impose administrative penalties in certain circumstances. Yes. One other actor in addition to the Data Protection Commissioner is the Data Privacy Officer. Clause 67 on page 74 of the Act also identifies the Data Privacy Officer. And this officer ensures that the data being processed is done in a lawful manner. And this Data Privacy Officer must have independence and not be subject to easy dismissal and penalty for just performing their duties of looking out for the privacy of the citizen. And this Data Privacy Officer is the contact person within the entity. That's the person you call in the entity when you have privacy issues or you want to make inquiries of a particular organization. Now, every single entity that will be collecting and processing your information is required to designate a privacy officer, except for the courts. That's because they are covered under exemptions in the bill, etc., and we will get to exemptions in a minute. Now, the Data Privacy Officer is not an employee of the Data Protection Commissioner. It's a separate and that is in the organization. Remember, the Data Protection Commissioner is all about the administration and making sure there's compliance, etc. So the Data Privacy Office, that's a separate entity. The Data Privacy Officer is somewhere operating within the entity that controls or processes your information. And another one of the actors, in addition to the Data Protection Officer and the Data Privacy Officer, is the Data Controller. That can be a natural person or a legal person, meaning an entity that controls the purpose. So the Data Controller controls the purpose. They have the final say in the purpose for which your data is being used. And then you have the Data Processor, who can be a natural person or a legal person, meaning an entity as well. But the data processor now is responsible for doing the actual manipulation and processing, deals with the organization and the dissemination of your information. So you see there are distinct roles in that regard. And of course, the data subject would be you, the general member of the public. And then the tribunal, we talked about the tribunal. If you refer to the schedule to the bill, the tribunal is that judicial body that is set up to hear complaints under this act. Their decisions, the decision of the tribunal, has the same weight as that of the courts, but their decisions can be appealed. You have the opportunity to launch a complaint, as I mentioned, to the Data Commissioner. And of course, you can go all the way up to the tribunal and finally the higher courts. So what if your data is obtained and not from you? Now, in this bill, we have taken particular care to make sure that when someone obtains your data from a source other than you directly, you must be told. You must be told of any intention to transfer your data to others, as I mentioned earlier, and I will repeat because this is the first time you are hearing this. And the repetition will make sure that you truly get it. Not only any intention to transfer your data, you must be told if somebody other than you is transferring, is sharing that data. The safeguards that would be in place, how long the data will be kept, where the processing of your data will be done. Will it be done in Barbados or will it be done somewhere else? Your rights with respect to your data. So the person, the entity, whether it's a legal person or an individual, has to tell you of your rights. Your right to access, your right to rectify the data. So if the data on you is incorrect, you have the right to ask to have it rectified. You have the right to have some of your data erased. You have the right to restrict processing. You have the right to object to processing. You have the right to have that data in a portable format. And you must be informed of those rights. Now, people will put it all in a data privacy policy and tell you, click on this, here's my data privacy policy, my data protection policy. But those are some of the key things that they must make sure are there for you to be able to know, and they are required to tell you. I mentioned earlier that if you then make a query about your data and say, well, who has my data and what are you doing with my data? People cannot choose to ignore you or get back to you when they feel like. In this act, there is the provision that speaks to them getting back to you within a reasonable time without due delay, being defined as at the latest within 1 month. And I put a little asterisk there because that 1 month can be extended to 2, but they must give you a reason why they could not get back to you in the time stipulated. So you don't make a query and they get back to you when they think or when it suits them. There is a required amount of time. And where the data was used to contact you and you were not the one who gave them that data in the first place, at the latest, they must tell you the first time that you are contacted where they got your data and what else they plan to do with it. That's right. There are many more provisions in that section, and rather than go through all of them, understand that we have made sure that in this bill, you not only have the right to know, but they have to tell you expeditiously. The penalties and the consequences. Mr. President, there are consequences for non-compliant behavior with this act. And data breaches attract the most severe of the penalties. There are criminal sanctions and there are administrative sanctions, all defined in this act. The Data Protection Commissioner, however, can impose an administrative sanction if it is in the public interest or if the seriousness of the contravention merits it. You can get some fines anywhere from $1 to $50, 50,000. If, however, people sell your data or even offer to sell data, $100,000 summary conviction, 3 years in jail or both. And I mentioned earlier that if when you make a query or there has been an enforcement order or some attempt to deal with compliance from the Data Protection Commissioner, and people then come in and lie, or they make false statements, that attracts the highest penalty, $500,000, $500,000 on summary conviction. The penalties are deliberately stiff because it is important that in this digital age where data is currency, people are not mismanaging your personal data and that the consequences are significant. And you will notice throughout this bill, the penalties are spread all the way through, as I said, ranging all the way from $1 to $500,000 and time in jail or time in jail. And you will notice that I mentioned earlier that there are categories and circumstances, there are about 20 or so of them, identified in Part 5 on page 46 of the bill, under which provisions in this bill would not apply. So you cannot expect to invoke the provisions of this data protection bill in certain circumstances. If it is a situation of national security, you cannot invoke this bill. If it relates to crime and taxation, cannot invoke the provisions of this bill. If it relates to the armed forces and to the lawyers in the room, judicial appointments and honors, cannot invoke. Examinations, research, history and statistics. And so I will not go through all 20 of them. Page 46, Part 5. Gives you the full list of the exemptions where this would not apply and you cannot then invoke personal protection to your data. Yes, I will. Thank you, Mr. President. Now, I could go on because this is a bill that I love and a bill I know. But I believe, Mr. President, that these few words give a flavor of what this data protection bill is set up to do. What are the key principles? What are your rights? What are the penalties? What are the exemptions? And I look forward, Mr. President, to an exciting debate in this honorable House on this new and transformational bill. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator McConney, for that great presentation. It occurred to me, listening to the presentation, that really this bill is all about, once you get past the legalities and privacy issues and principles, it's about trust and helping people. We spend a lot of time going through exemptions and so forth, but when we trust that the data we provide governments and businesses follows the principles that Senator McConney set out, and I made a list of some of them here, that is collected fairly, that is accurate, that's treated confidentially, it's transparent, and that there are limits on its use, and above all, that I own it. When we trust that a government or a business is going to follow those principles, well, then that trust allows us to lay a foundation for the provision of digital services, and Senator McConney used a great word there, enabling. That allows us to enable the provision of digital services that may improve the lives of ordinary citizens, either by saving them time or by increasing the convenience of such and such a process. And I think I'll touch on a couple of those as I go through. So I'd like to just talk about concrete, tangible examples of areas where data protection enables the provision of a digital service that touches and improves the lives of ordinary citizens in a way that ultimately is to the aggregate benefit of society. So the first example that really jumps out at me is banks and know your customer legislation, KYC as it's called in the jargon. Now, anyone who's dealt with a bank, they may not recognize that the bank is following a KYC process, but if you've been asked every year to prove your address, although the same bank holds the mortgage on your house and knows very well that you live in it, it's following a KYC process. If you go to open an account, which can take 10 to 15 working days sometimes, you have to go in, make an appointment, provide documents, maybe you forgot one, go home, get it, come back again. That's all about a know your customer process. Now, the average bank spends about 40 to 50 million US dollars a year on these processes. Some of them are anti-money laundering, some of them are compliance, and some of them are KYC. And it spends that amount of money because the risks that they run in getting it wrong are really severe. Their banking licenses can be removed, they can be sanctioned very heavily in financial terms. So banks are always interested in using digital services to make these processes more efficient. And if they make them more efficient, it makes it more convenient for the ordinary person, ordinary bank customer. So for example, in our region, depending on where you look, there are a lot of banks. I think Trinidad has about 8 banks that operate in Trinidad. Eastern Caribbean has about 17 banks, and so on. Barbados, we have about 5. Each of those areas has even more credit unions. They all have to follow these KYC processes that are very, very expensive. So from time to time, they talk about creating a data warehouse, following data protection rules that would make it far more efficient to test out and understand who is claiming to be a bank customer, who is asking for a bank account, and so on. The savings they could extract from that are so significant, should they manage to actually agree to do it, that it is potentially the case that chance would be a fine thing, but that they could lower their fees, that they could make banking facilities more accessible to the ordinary person in the street. And even if they fail to do that, those who are already customers will find it easier and easier to bank. They might bank online. They might do all sorts of KYC compliance tasks remotely rather than have to go into a branch. So that is one concrete example of how trust in a data protection act can have a knock-on effect in the real world, if you like, and impact the lives of ordinary citizens in a meaningful way. There's another little element to that whole data warehousing story. This is a region that's particularly threatened by the loss of what are called correspondent bank facilities. One of the reasons for that is the correspondent banks, they're very concerned also about KYC and money laundering. They're a banker's bank. Where it's the case that they can't fully trust the data that's coming from these domestic banks in the region, they are very reluctant to maintain those relationships. If it can be shown, if the trust can be engendered through this kind of legislation, that the information a bank provides, it is accurate, it is fair, it's up to date, it's owned by the customer, it's confidential, it has limits on the use it can be put forward, and that's in a data warehouse, and a correspondent bank, for example, could consult it, it is less likely they'd be inclined to de-risk our region. So this may not be one that directly helps someone, an ordinary citizen, but it's one we should be aware of, because if a bank suddenly up sticks and leaves, we are the worst for it. Second area that, listening to Senator McConney, that struck me where data protection is absolutely key is in the provision of government services. So I have two examples there. When I missed the last Senate session, it was because I was on a trip to Haiti, a business trip. Now that's an eye-opening place in terms of data and poverty and how do you develop your economy. One of the issues that they have in Haiti is a very inefficient cadastral system. They cannot prove, I'm exaggerating slightly, but it is not always the case you know who owns what parcel of land. Well, that is all about data. Trusting the data, understanding that your data is not going to be abused, you're not going to be robbed by, I was about to say, some lawyer, I don't mean to infer lawyers look to embezzle money at all, but you're not going to be tricked because you can trust the data. And if they had some sort of data protection act such as the one proposed here, it would have a knock-on effect to their cadastral system. And that's important in several ways. If you don't know and can't prove you own the land you're sitting on, you can't raise money against it. This is something we're familiar with, I think, in Barbados. And similarly, if someone wants to invest in your country and it doesn't know for sure who owns this land, can I build a factory on this? They're not inclined to make their foreign direct investment. And at the root of this problem is data protection and the provision of good data such that government services can be trusted. In a similar vein and closer to home, you may know the national insurance scheme here prints and sends out about 1.2 million checks a year. 1.2 million checks. I'm not sure they have a particular issue on data protection. I'm sure they get it right. But if that process could be, let me amend that. I'm sure they largely get it right. If that process could be made more efficient by being transformed into a digital process, for example, whereby people didn't have to come down to the NISQ, pick up a paper check, put it in a bank where it could sit for 2 or 3 days while it clears. If the length of time and the cost associated with those 1.2 million checks could be reduced by dispersing it electronically to a bank account, to a credit union account, to even a telephone, that would be a good thing. that would save money, that would increase convenience. How are you going to do that if you can't trust the data and the providers of services of these digital services, be it the banks, be it payment specialists, be it what have you? Data protection is, again, right at the root of enabling that kind of service. People, I think, are fine sending money electronically so long as it's a small amount. But the moment it starts to become important, they want certain assurances over security, accuracy, confidentiality, and so forth. And it comes from legislation such as that proposed in this bill. I mentioned payments, be it a mobile platform, be it a credit union, be it a bank. Many of those processes of sending money to someone, a loved one, someone in another country, are convoluted. They take a lot of time. They're very expensive. And again, I've seen this for myself in my travels to Jamaica and Haiti. And I think those, again, represent really good examples of where data protection can enable a better way of doing things that directly benefits citizens. So in the case of remittances, in both Jamaica and Haiti, remittances represent an enormous percentage of their GDP. In Jamaica, it's something like 20%. It's $2.5 billion a year that are remitted to Jamaica. And in Haiti, it's even more. It's $3.5 billion, and that's over 30% of their GDP. Now, the fees associated with sending that money, and the World Bank has done studies on this, so these figures come from there. In the case of Haiti, range between about 5.9% and almost 9%. If you just manage to cut those fees by a single percentage point, that represents a savings of $35 million a year. Now, anyone who is fortunate enough to go to Haiti will be able to see how $35 million could improve the lives of ordinary citizens roaming the streets, living in 4 paling walls, maybe half the size of the ante-room over there that we enjoy here, who have to endure their garbage disposal is piled up on the street and burnt. That's plastics, polyesters, and so on. It's a nation of extremes. And it sounds strange to say that something as intellectual or esoteric as data protection could contribute to their well-being. If you can solve KYC problems associated with remittance payments by making them cheaper and more efficient digitally. And another way of saying that is, can people trust the data you give them, trust you to send this money to a loved one in Haiti or in Jamaica? Well, you solve a pretty big problem, but it's all in protecting people's data. The last example I think I'd like to talk a little bit about is what's going on in the Bahamas and the Eastern Caribbean with their central banks, where they're both proposing to undertake pilots that digitize their currency. In both those cases, what they're trying to do has to be underpinned by sound data protection legislation. You're talking about getting licensed financial institutions for whom confidentiality and accuracy of data is paramount to cooperate with a central bank in a project that promotes the circulation of a digital version of cash, a digital fiat currency. Ordinary people are not going to participate in that if they don't believe it is as sound as cash. And a lot of that trust comes from, is their data being protected? Does it follow some of those principles that Senator McConney laid out? Is my data going to be recorded accurately? Do I own it? Can I change it? Is it transparent? Are you accountable if you make a mistake? Now, what is at stake here generally for somewhere like the Bahamas or the Eastern Caribbean? Well, a lot of the goals of those central bankers are to reduce the amount of cash circulating in the economy. And that's because using cash is expensive. In this region, about 30% of unrecognized GDP is in the informal economy, that is to say the cash economy, where people don't have so much money. So the people who are really paying for the cost of cash are the ones who have the least amount of money. And if you can get them to use a digital form of cash, that is to say, get them to trust that their data is being protected, they stand to disproportionately benefit from this kind of legislation. In the case of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, they want to reduce cash use by 50% in the next 8 or 10 years. They are looking to find ways to do domestic remittances faster, cheaper, and more securely than it's possible right now. I went to Montserrat, drumming up business on a very small airplane that I don't recommend everybody do. And we heard a story there that a guy had to order a part for his car in Antigua, which is a ferry trip away. And it was a part that if he ordered it, if he was in the US, I think it would have cost, mind you, the retail price wasn't the big story here. It was the transportation price and the fee attached to the payment. What should have cost $30 or $40 is coming from next door, costs $90. A lot of that is around frictions in payments that the governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank wants to reduce. And these are things that can be done if there's a foundation upon which people can rest their trust. So data protection is important. It's important for broader initiatives that our governments in the Eastern Caribbean and the Bahamas are undertaking. And it's very, very important that people can trust how their data is held by banks and governments. And I just finish up on one story. I remember a long time ago, someone was trying to explain to me how trust is something that you take for granted. And it's actually pretty hard to engender. And this person said to me, you know, when you're driving down the street, what stops the guy on the other side of the road changing lanes and just driving right into you? And it's trust. There's a social contract there. And it's the same with data protection. If we can create that level of trust, well, frankly, there's a prairie of opportunity opens up in terms of the provision of digital services for things that can help us, be it the NIS, be it a digital currency that can cut the costs of all sorts of financial transactions, to any of the other things that I've mentioned, banks, KYCs, financial inclusion. All of these are enabled by sound data protection. And with that, Mr. President, I'm obliged.
I next recognize Senator Wiggins.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak on the Data Protection Act here, bill that is before this honorable chamber. And I can actually continue from where Senator Adams finished in terms of the whole question of trust. I would like to ask the minister if there will be a rollout education for the population of Barbados in relation to this whole question of the collection of data. Because by nature, we tend to be very secretive with our very personal information. We wonder when we giving out this information, who is going to get it? I heard the minister alluded to consequences for non-compliance and so on. But I would also like to let her know that with the social media platforms like Facebook and so on, ever so often there are leaks. And all your personal data goes to people whom you know nothing about, and they can have access to your information. So what kind of confidence is the government going to give the people of Barbados in relation to real protection of their data? And one of the critical areas that I would mention would be medical records. Medical records. Now, you go to a polyclinic, I believe, in terms of the whole data protection, that your information, if you go to a polyclinic and you've given all your personal information and they've taken all your blood samples and everything like that, if you go to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, they too would be able to access that data in terms of the shared services that I believe will happen. It happens, as I said, I know in other jurisdictions, you can go from one hospital to another and they can access all of your medical records. What I would like to find out, and Barbados is a very small society, what level of security would a nurse have as different from a doctor, as different from an administrative person in relation to access to your medical records? Because it is the same type of fear that people would feel in terms of the banks. Now, currently, I do believe that the central bank and all the commercial banks have integrated software where they can tell if you apply at one bank for a loan and you lie and say you don't have a loan at National Bank, they can tell you no. They're going and tell you right away, our records, and they have access to your personal data. A lot of people in Barbados are not aware of this. The banks already have an integrated system, and they do have a lot of access to your personal data. So the question is, if somebody was gypsy, and again, they can go and do a search on you, as the minister said, put in, your name and date of birth, and they can get everything that they want to find out on you. And I would think that the people of Barbados would need a level of confidence to know that this very personal information and things like blood samples, as I said, are really important. Do I want to know that I would tell somebody if you're diabetic or if you have high blood pressure or low blood pressure, but there are other personal data that blood gives you. Do you want John Public to know that? Indeed not. You don't want it. So people need that level of security and confidence. And I would like to know what kind of educational program that the government would be rolling out in terms of helping the people of Barbados feel better to be able to give their data. Because you have things like the census, where you're counting the amount of people who are in the country. And there's a lot of personal data that is required in that census. They ask your salary, they ask, all kinds of personal information that you have to give. So you're thinking that, yes, with all these consequences, that there won't be any leaks, but we all know about Cambridge Analytica and things that happen with people's personal data because it is harvested. People make programs where they can, one time you heard that WhatsApp was so secured. Now people have made programs to access your WhatsApp messages. They are no longer end-to-end encrypted. They are no longer secured. So I'm saying that, yes, even though you're saying that, there'll be penalties for security breaches will occur. And these breaches might not necessarily occur in Barbados. They can occur anywhere in the world. So people have to be conscious and cognizant of these things. Another area where you get a lot of data protection is, let's say, email addresses. The truth is, in terms of email addresses, when we get the email, we get email addresses of every member of the House of Assembly and the Senate. And in terms of data protection, you're not supposed to expose a person's email unless they give you permission. So you should see the emails coming from the Clerk of Parliament just to you and to undisclosed recipients. Because you do not want, I might not want to share my information with Senator Tate. So what I'm saying is that that's another area, given that we are looking at data protection, email addresses is a big thing. It's a big thing. You cannot send out emails to everybody and everybody's addresses are exposed. It is a breach. It is a very, very serious breach, because through that, other people can hack into your email addresses. People can hack into your email addresses, and once they start hacking your email addresses, they're going to be hacking everything else. And of course, you have the issue of utilities, all your utility records, where again, all this data, most data is common. So there are lots of things that, in terms of data protection, that we have to drill down on. Your utility records, your email addresses, your medical records. And of course, in this, in terms of collection of data, political parties collect data on all the members who may or may not be their members. So they have a comprehensive database. So you are going to get, at election time, a lot of messages via social media, whether it's WhatsApp, Instagram, email, and so on. And it's like, where did these people get my email address from? How you know my telephone number to send me a WhatsApp message? So political parties themselves, their databases are massive. And this is a way in which, for the electoral process as well, a lot of personal information is also collected and stored in the electoral office. Have these people been trained to say that nobody can access this information? Mind you, I support this bill. I definitely support this bill, because I like the idea, knowing in terms of what Senator Adams alluded to, that Barbados should become a cashless society. Cashless society, because it saves money in the long run. Because if you go to the supermarket, because in Europe, checks are obsolete. Nobody uses checks anymore. So you have your cards, and you go and tap. I noticed that Massey at Coverly, you can tap your card, and to access services. So we're happy about those things, because I'm really happy to see, since I came back here, that Barbados is definitely moving in the direction of full digitization. You can also get the situation where you can use your bank card when you get on the bus and tap as you get in, and you go ahead, and you're on your bus ride on your way. So there are many, many processes that can happen with this new digitization, as well as data protection. So I think that there must be a lot of built-in securities in every single place. Like I said, whether it's be the hospitals, the polyclinics, but I personally would like to know the levels of access for medical information. I think that's very important in a small country like Barbados. As I said, when you live in these big countries in Europe, I can move from Guy's Hospital to Royal Free. They don't care who I am. So they have my information, that's fine. But in Barbados, you are polyclinic, Sir Winston Scott Polyclinic, and somebody said, wait, she went to the polyclinic, you know, she got AIDS? And people will spread this information in Barbados. And I think it's a very, very important thing that there must be levels of security, and persons who have access to people's personal data must be trained and not to be gossiping. But that's a very serious thing in terms of individual information that you might have real access to. I don't want Rommel, Senator Springer, to know he don't have any money in the bank. But if he works in the bank, he can have access to all the banking information at all the banks to know how much money I have there. So will these people be trained to the extent to let them know that confidentiality and security is the key to any data protection laws being implemented in this country? And Mr. President, with those few words, I support this bill, and I give it my 100% assent. Thank you.
Senator Springer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to also with a smile in my heart because of this bill, and more importantly, because of the direction that this government is going in terms of its adoption of e-government and in terms of its adoption of new technologies. Of course, at the rate at which technology is evolving, it's important that we put certain laws in place to ensure the proper management of this technology. In the public sector, we have seen the rapid move towards the use of technology, and a good example would be TAMIS. I'm sure that all of us here would have filed our income tax return. I'm sure that all of us would have used it in the past, and we would have seen that the whole system has been digitized. We now file electronically as opposed to manually, as we did years ago. And we see how those types of integrated systems work. And for the most part, they have made the process a bit more efficient and certainly a lot faster. Mr. President, in order for a country like Barbados to take full advantage of the technologies that are now available, we must not only master that technology as it comes to us, we must also have a new mindset, a new paradigm in terms of how government works and how government manages information. As I said earlier, this includes amending old legislation and, in this case, framing new laws to protect the information of persons within this country. In 2019, in this world that we live in today, every single thing, as mentioned by Senator Wiggins, Senator Adams, everything is digitized. Everything that we do. Every call that we make on the phone can be logged. It is logged. See it on the bill. Every picture that we take, every aspect of us, of our personal life, can now be logged somewhere. And it's important that those persons who harvest or who gather or who capture this information, that they use it or they demonstrate a level of safety, a level of maturity when dealing with your information. And that takes me back. And the reason I mentioned that, and I know it was mentioned by the minister when she led off the bill, the use of your information. I remember some years ago, it could be about 20 years ago or so, I was still a teenager, 20 plus years ago. And I received a piece of mail, it was airmail, if you remember that, airmail. And when I opened that mail, I saw that I had won, I think it was like maybe 80 or 90 million dollars. It was a lot of money. It was a lot of money, maybe $800,000. I don't remember the exact figure, but it was a lot of money. El Gordo, one of those raffles. in Spain, I think it came from. And I was, I was surprised that piece of mail came to me. I didn't believe that I want any money because I didn't enter anything. But I said, it wouldn't do me any harm if I just replied to the mail. Yes. Of course, I was skeptical. But I wrote my name, I spelled it with an A, and I decided not to put the ER on the end of Springer. And for years after that, I received mail in my email, in my inbox, from all various types of companies with my name misspelled. My first name and my last name misspelled. It was because I realized that because of that piece of correspondence that I responded to, that those persons use that information then to spam me with useless emails for years. Actually, I didn't even realize, I guess because of the security in inbox now, that it has stopped.
You've avoided telling us whether you won that large sum of money.
You see, that's the lure. So I understand what happens with your information. We need to understand that our data, our personal information has a value. And there are research companies out there that will pay big money for that information. And we don't have a clue how they will use it. But this piece of legislation, Mr. President, I believe protects us from such companies by giving us rights. And the minister would have mentioned some of these rights that we have. And I'm gonna highlight them in the legislation under clause 10. It says that that particular piece of the legislation makes provisions for the right of data, of the data subject or the person or the individual to have access to their personal data. You know that without even thinking about it, we give our information to banks, insurance companies, telephone companies. We go online, we just give them everything they ask for. They ask about how many children you have and the ages, like that's relevant. But we don't think about it because we want to get the transaction over and done with. So we give our information without thinking. I'm surprised. And it's funny that Senator Wiggins will raise her concerns about the information in the hospital. I mean, this bill does not give anybody any right now to have access to information. This bill protects that information as already stored. You understand? This bill protects you. Persons will have access to your medical records. They have access to your medical records. But under this piece of legislation, if that information is digitized, I'm sure, then you have some protection. You could perhaps, whereas in the past you could not, I never heard of any person going to a doctor, even though it might have happened, or a hospital, and telling them to destroy their records, even though I'm not saying that that's not possible. But now you can do it. Under this piece of legislation, you have those rights. You have the right to have your information altered. And this is important because there's a lot of old information, outdated information about persons out there that is being bandied around, being used, that bears no true resemblance to the person as they are today. But you don't know this. Because before this piece of legislation was tabled, people did not pay close enough attention to these things, We do not, as a people, pay close enough attention to what's happening with our information. And I'm going to give you another example that maybe you might have been caught up with the letter from the El Gordo raffle, but I'm sure that many of you here have your information stored on your browser. Many of you, because of convenience or maybe laziness, you said that you're going to save your passwords, your bank account information, your credit card information, addresses, because we don't remember those things these days. That's a fact. The way the mind works these days, the way things are, people hardly take the trouble to remember certain things. Certainly not going to remember your credit card number. You may remember your address. Of course you remember your address, but even your best friend's telephone number or cell phone number, you don't remember. So you have it saved somewhere, maybe on Google, on Google Drive or something like that. But it's saved on your computer. And you don't think about what happens to that information. That information could be harvested and sold. We think very little about it. And the member over there, the Senator Wiggins, she mentioned Cambridge Analytica. She mentioned a scandal that occurred just recently where a lot of information was harvested from Facebook, people's personal information. And you know we put a lot of personal information, maybe too much personal information on Facebook on a daily basis. Everything we do. If we're going to have a cup of coffee, we put it on Facebook, some people. Yes. You know, you step out your house in a new outfit, you take a picture, you put it on Facebook. These are things that people do on a daily. And there are persons there waiting to catch, just to harvest that information. They know everything about you already. They know. And there's no provision in place right now to stop them, especially if it's a Barbadian company, from using that information to do what they're pleased with. And this piece of legislation gives you the power to treat to that. So that's why I see it as good legislation, to quote the senator on the other side there. Mr. President, we live in a digital age. It's a digital age. Everything about us has been digitized. There's no getting around it now. There's nothing that we can do about it. The most we can do is enact laws as a government to ensure that the information that is already stored is protected. And the information that will be captured going forward is protected. And that the individual, the average man in the street who is not even aware that he's giving his information to someone who can use it for malicious purposes, is protected and made aware. You know, it is funny that the minister, when she mentioned the principles of this particular piece of legislation, she mentioned those raffles and such like that you see when you go to certain supermarkets or if you see online and you give your information, because we all been victims of those things. We give our information for one thing, maybe because we give an email because we want to enter some race or something like that. Maybe as simple as a race. But then for the next couple of months, we get emails from all over the place. We get spam, we get all these things. And in the past, there was nothing that we could do about it. There was nothing that you could do about it. You could complain privately to your friends, but there was nothing in place that could ensure that there's a penalty for distributing or publishing somebody's information. And there are persons who would willfully and deliberately publish your information. And if that information is sensitive information, like what the senator referred to, it makes it even worse. In a society like Barbados, you do not want people knowing your business, as we put it in Bajan parlance. You do not want people to know what afflictions you have, what medication you are taking. You do not want these things. And we have to have strong legislation to ensure that if a person takes it upon themselves to share that information, there's going to be a price to pay for it. And I'm satisfied with the type of figures that I'm seeing: $100,000, $500,000 for those persons who deliberately do this, because it could devastate a person's life. If you shared certain pieces of information, we attended a conference there just the other day, many of these senators here, about HIV and AIDS. And one of the speakers made the point that some information about a person's status was shared, caused persons to commit suicide. That's how deadly it gets. That's how deadly it can get. So that's why it's so important that we have this kind of legislation in place that person's personal information, sensitive information, is protected. And that you have that type of latitude now where you can go, if you know there's information about you stored somewhere, you can go and have that information erased, have that information forgotten. Why should persons have information about you that they gathered 8 or 9 or 10 years ago? Why? Why should persons have information about your family? You go fill out certain forms, they want to know if your marital status and how long you were married and how many children you have. And that has nothing to do with what business you are undertaking. It's really, I don't talk about sexual preference. I don't know why they would want that. No? Why? Why is that even relevant? But there are persons who would gather that information not because it's relevant to the business as being conducted at the moment, but it's useful because it has a price tag attached to it. And this is the type of industries that we are not familiar with. As the average man in the street, we don't know these things happen, but they do. They happen. And we are victims of it. I mean, I mentioned earlier that we save all our information on our browser these days because it's convenient to do so. And because some of us are lazy. But you know, when we browse the internet sometimes, and it's happened to everyone here, I'm sure, you browse the internet looking at maybe a product, and then for the next couple of months you can see pop-ups and notices on products and similar products. And you wonder how the internet know this? You know? How they know that I was looking at a cream for dry skin? You know, how do they know this? You understand? How did this company know to contact me? On every platform, you know. Yes. But then you realize that information that the browser captured on you was either, well, sold or traded. But it was given away, it was distributed. And we are victims, and we did not even know that we were victims.
I was in the hospital to get one for burial insurance.
There you go. There you go. Somebody, maybe something that you searched, and been talking to Senator Franklin now, something that he might have searched was in the hospital. That information was captured. It was determined that he was near death. And he got a piece of correspondence looking at burial insurance. But I mean, I'm not making light of it because it's a serious matter.
I take it that is illustrative, not.
Of course, Mr. President. I'm not making light of it. The reality is that we do not even realize that we think these things are good things. You know, we like the convenience of it when it happens.
Word may get out that the senator is near death.
But you must always be warned that, yes, there's a convenient use, but there's also a malicious use. And as much as we like the convenient use, we're not going to like the malicious use when it happens. And sometimes we need to be protected from ourselves, because some people will say, but why, you know, these people can't have my information. It makes it easy for me. But it also makes it easy for somebody else to use your information to access your bank accounts and such like. And you will see on television every so often somebody complain about their bank account. Not even on television, it happens right here. You get a call from the bank saying your credit card was used in Haiti, or I just used Haiti because it was mentioned, or China, or somewhere in the States, or somewhere in Africa, or someplace where you have not been or have never been. But your bank account is being used to purchase items in these places. That's because your information was traded to someone in that jurisdiction. And you don't know. You didn't know. Yeah. There's a lot of information that we need that's being stored that we need to have removed and have forgotten, have to be erased. There you go. And I'm not gonna go into. I know the Senator Wiggins, she mentioned about confidence. But I think a bill like this if you're concerned about trust and confidence, this bill is not really a punitive bill. It's not. It's a bill that I think strengthens the credibility of companies because they know, and we know as the public, that they know that there's a heavy price to pay if they misuse your information. So you know when your information goes to these companies, especially the ones here, domicile here, that information is going to be safeguarded because there's a price to pay. Before, right now, as it stands, there's no price to pay. If your information is leaked, I mean, it might not even be leaked intentionally. There's accidental leaks. An accidental leak is just as devastating as an intentional leak, you know. The accidental leak is just if that incident we had up there in Pine Road, that was accidental, but it could have been just as deadly as if it was intentional. In the Pine, in Wildy. Yes? So we have to be conscious of the fact that accidental leaks are just as devastating, but there's no consequence. But this bill ensures that persons who capture information must have individuals in place that's a controller, data privacy process officers to ensure that information is being kept safely. It's being kept securely. You understand? You need to know that this strengthens that credibility aspect of doing business in Barbados because you know that they know that they can't move flippantly with your information anymore. They can't deal with your information in such a way that anybody has access to it. So to answer some of your questions, Minister Wiggins, the measures are in place not only to safeguard your information, but to ensure that credibility is secured and ensured because businesses don't want to spend out that kind of money. And we know that. So they're going to put the measures in place to ensure that your sensitive information, your personal information, does not get out. And I'm satisfied that there's legislation in the pipeline to deal with what you would have mentioned about maybe non-state actors or other persons having access to your information and deliberately using that information to victimize or to hurt or to devastate you. This legislation in the pipeline. I assure you of that. Yes? We are aware that is a feature of this digital age, ransomware. People using software to infiltrate your information and asking for ransom or threatening to share that information if you don't pay the ransom. We know, we are aware of that. That's one of the facts of life when it comes to the digital age. But we're working on that as well. And making it in such a way that people would think twice, 3, 4 times before they do that. We're securing our boundaries because this internet information has no boundaries. It sees no boundaries. So the approach has to be holistic like that. So I assure you that is being looked at. As I conclude, Mr. President, I want to commend the Minister for her thorough presentation of this bill. She did a fantastic job of bringing greater awareness and explain to many of us in here who I suspect did not fully understand the bill. She did a good job of explaining this bill and a good job of explaining the bill to the public, I'm sure. She always does. I would agree with that. So I just want to commend the Minister. And I also want to, as I end, in the same way that I started, commend the government on this initiative, on this bill, moving forward, and putting these safeguards in place to ensure that people retain ownership of their information and that people's information or individuals' information is protected. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend for lunch until 2:45 p.m.
Aye.